Often when people think of the word grief, they think of death, dying, that kind of loss, the loss of a friend, the loss of a loved one. But grief is broader than that. There's a lot of different ways we grieve or we experience loss. So if you could, can you define what grief is and the different ways we experience grief?
I heard David Kessler, who we're going to talk about and I will refer to a lot in this podcast. He said that the worst loss is your loss. And that is so true, right? I am so sorry for the pain that each of my clients go through because I don't feel that pain. I feel my pain, right? And they don't feel my pain. I don't want to ever act as if I know the feeling of what somebody is going through in their grief process. Grief is a wide category. It's really the death of something, and that can be the loss of a best friend that you had for a long time. Maybe you switch jobs and the coworker dynamic is not the same, right? And it's not as fun to go to work anymore. Or maybe you're going through a divorce, or maybe you lost a child, or maybe it was the death of a mother or a friend.
So or a loss of an idea, a loss of a vision, a loss of a career. There's so many ways we can lose things that are really dear to us.
Yeah, really one of the hardest parts of grief is grieving what was, what you no longer have, right? And sometimes we don't realize what we do have until it's gone. That's kind of cliche, but true.
So
it's
true.
Like that with the pandemic, we didn't really realize different pleasantries that we enjoyed. And so we grieved the loss of those simple things like hugging each other or getting together or maybe even doing your grocery shopping in person, even though a lot of us now still pick up, myself
still really
included.
Enjoy it.
Yeah. But there's so many different circumstances. And I think the first thing really is just learning to be aware of your grief, calling it what it actually is, right? That it is grief, and feeling the feelings of that. Avoiding it is not going to ever get you through it.
Often counselors, when working with grief, I know this is how I was trained, we're trained in the 5 stages of grief. What's your experience with those 5 stages and how do you incorporate them into your practice?
I would unpack the 5 stages of grief, how they're used in counseling as the framework and the patterns that have been identified for how people work through grief. It's not linear. It's not sequential. It might be for you. For people that haven't heard of the 5 stages of grief, those 5 stages created by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And we'll touch on that more throughout this podcast. And then there's also the 6th stage of meaning added to that by David Kessler, who actually studied under Kubler-Ross, the importance of that finding meaning 6th stage that is newer to our psychology studies and literature. Those 5 stages, if people haven't heard of it, help in giving people a level of normalcy of like, oh, that's what I'm feeling. So that's normal, right? Or yeah, that's where I'm at. Like when your maps go, we've lost connection, right? Now you have no idea where you're headed. This can feel like a GPS of just helping with,
oh, that's nice.
I can't even figure out where the next step is. Can maybe serve as that. So it's just there to help us identify maybe what we're going through or where we're at in our grief process.
And help organize the different places we can land in grieving, whether that is depression, anger, somewhere in between.
We're going to move through this like it's a wave, and different waves are going to crash into the shoreline just like they do at the ocean. And these 5 stages, the different waves that are going to come crashing inside of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. You will likely hit all of those stages at different points, and even more likely you'll bounce back to other stages a couple times. I know for me in my journey, it was like, wait, was this a setback that I'm feeling angry again when I thought I had gotten to acceptance? And that is just not the case. You just have to acknowledge, no, this is what I'm feeling. This is my truth. I feel it was such monumental acknowledgement for people of like, that's what it is. That's what I've been feeling. To tame it, name it.
Yeah. Brene Brown's research echoes that. When you speak something out loud, you're worried about something you feel shame around, it loses 80% of its power. Maybe it's not her research, but I read it in one of her books. So it could have, she could have been referencing someone else's research. But I'm wondering if we could break down these 5 stages of grief a little more. So first with denial. One way I describe denial to people is it's our brain's way of protecting us. Because if we were to feel, let's say when someone passes away that's very near and dear to us, if we were to feel the pain of their loss all at the same time, I think it would overwhelm us to the point of panic attack, shutting down, breaking down, not being able to function. And usually there's a lot of things to do when there's a loss, preparing for the funeral, making big decisions. Denial gives us the ability to shut off the pain for a moment and focus on everyday work and just kind of get into the rhythm of life. Denial isn't somewhere we need to stay, but it's a functional tool to survive and cope, continue to provide for our families, or continue to make food.
Yeah. I mean, let's not deny how powerful our brains were designed to be. They go into survival mode, right? They respond for us to protect us. Don't add to the grief by hating how you've survived, right? Thank yourself for showing up, for doing what it needed to do to get you through. I think that what you just said painted it perfectly. How can you plan a funeral if you're actively allowing yourself to really sit in the depression stage or the anger stage?
Not much will get done.
No, it does
Unfortunately.
help people survive. It's just like when we have the fight, flight, or freeze response. So yes, but you cannot stay in the denial.
I often see people who don't realize that they never move past the denial stage. Maybe they did have some anger, maybe they did have some depression, but they didn't really work through those stages and they're still really stuck. I almost see it in people's affect and their facial expression more than anything of they'll tell me something that happened. Yeah, my mom passed away a few months ago, but there's no emotional expression of pain or loss or hurt in their voice. It's so painful that they are shutting it down that much harder. And it's that much harder for them to experience or feel it. That's our job too, of helping people see the arenas that they have shut down and its lingering impact still hurting them. The emotion's still there, taking hold when least expected.
Right. Kind of digging underneath layer one to help them discover what they have buried inside that is there. I think with the anger stage specifically, to me, it doesn't just have to be that anger feeling. I think that's oftentimes what it is because you're angry that something was taken from you. It's like wrestling with the problem of evil. It's not fair. It shouldn't have happened. Right?
Why?
But it can be other feelings too that people feel. Maybe they just feel so frustrated with themselves or frustrated with somebody else. A lot of times, one of the biggest dividers is comparing what other people feel. Maybe if they're grieving the loss of the same thing versus what you feel, just leaning into what am I feeling in this process? What am I feeling right now connected to my grief and welcoming that and allowing
and
that
the
to be
why
there.
behind the anger. Because anger can show up as irritability, edgy. When someone else brings up their pain, you almost get angry at it in that sense of comparison. And so it's that giving yourself permission to slow down of why did I react like that? Why did I lose my temper there when that's not normally me? And what does that say about where I was feeling in that moment? Was I feeling more vulnerable, more overwhelmed by just the loss or the idea of the loss? And so giving yourself permission, it helps you understand the meaning and the importance of that person to you or of whatever the other types of loss are.
We want things to make sense. And so we need to make sense of what we're feeling or why we react or respond in a situation. And I just think that we often give grace easier to other people than we do ourselves.
So true. Yes.
If you overreact in a situation, just recognizing what you're going through, right? I'm not saying that you don't have to apologize or go back or work on something, right? But because we're all still responsible, it just helps us understand what's happening underneath on the inside, make sense of some things that we do on the outside.
Depression is one of the stages of grief, but it's often when people are going through grief, depression is the one that they associate grief with. But there are other pieces to this puzzle, like bargaining. If you could talk a little bit about bargaining and what role it plays when people are going through grief.
Bargaining is you trying to put this loss into a box and wrap it up for yourself. Almost like, this is what I need it to be or what to happen to work for me, to be able to survive, right?
It's the opposite of acceptance in my mind, because you're still running like, if I had only, maybe it wouldn't have happened. If they had only, when I experienced the loss of my grandmother, and she was a very heavy smoker. And so it was said a lot in the family after her loss, if she had only quit earlier in her life, maybe she would still be with us. Then it's almost like I'm fighting the reality. If that had happened, then I wouldn't be experiencing this pain. So it's almost like coming up with different scenarios. And it can also look like beating yourself up too. If I had answered the phone, I wish I didn't have, last thing we said to each other was anger or what have you. It's like that wrestling with organizing why it happened. What's my role? I don't want to accept that this has happened. It's too painful.
I think that organizing is kind of what I was alluding to in my brain. But I feel like what you just said, so true and beautiful. And it also just made me think of how similar the stages can feel. That maybe it will be
how
hard
they can
for
so
some
much
people.
overlap.
Yes, it can be hard for people to even identify when they're in the muck. What stage am I even in? And they're not sequential, but because bargaining kind of just now felt like denial, and denial can maybe feel like bargaining. So that can happen in your journey.
Absolutely. And what's the role of acceptance? A lot of people associate the word acceptance with, I'm okay with it. I'm good with it. I like it. And that's absolutely what acceptance is not. So how do you explain acceptance to clients, and why this is a goal we're trying to get to?
So 1000%, it's not accepting that you're okay with the loss, right? That you're good with it. If somebody dies, it's never okay. You're always sad, right? It's always going to hurt. There's always going to be a pain associated with that. It's almost accepting that reality, right? What you're going to live with, yet how you're going to be able to continue to live. It's literally wrestling with the tension of that. But I think that that's why I love the 6th stage of meaning and making meaning, because David Kessler, leading grief expert, found that through his own journey after losing his son, that when he got to acceptance, it wasn't good enough. He needed something else. And so he actually went to the Kubler-Ross foundation and asked permission to expand and add this 6th stage of meaning. And they granted him permission to that. And he saw the making meaning stage as finding purpose in the pain. And it became like a cushion, he said, or a life raft for him that he realized he didn't have before. So 1,000 times over, he'll take his son back. It's not a replacement, but it helped him in making meaning of what is so devastating and feels so impossible to ever move forward.
And it makes sense that acceptance is a necessary stage in getting to the meaning stage, because you have to accept, here it is. So acceptance to me isn't, I like that it's there. It's just, this is a microphone. Here it is. It's neither that I like it or dislike the microphone, but it exists, and it's right here in front of me. And so once we have that acceptance, we can do something with it. But if I denied this microphone's existence and I kept getting recorded, and I'm wondering why I'm getting recorded, then I'm not moving anywhere. I'm not resolving anything, right? So having that sense of acceptance, then we can do something with it. It's the power of acceptance, especially in the DBT literature, with their term radical acceptance. You have empowerment. Now you can manipulate and manage your emotion in a totally different way versus when you're in denial. You're suppressing, you're pushing down, you're bartering, you're debating, you're lost in your thoughts, you're hitting depression, you're kind of moving between all of the stages of grief. The grief almost has control over you. At any point in time, you could be angry or depressed or be bartering. You have that wave of emotion. You're kind of on that roller coaster, like you were describing.